Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with Street Fighter G.I. Joe. After M. Bison revealed the enhancements of the Destro-improved Psycho Drive, more fighters were whittled down, until the Tyrant faced off against Guile. When the soldier had the chance to terminate his old enemy, he instead caused further damage to the drive, costing him the match and maybe Cammy White's trust. The finals have arrived, finally, and it's a clash of crimson-clad combatants with Bison up against Jinx. Issue 5's cover is another big brawl, though it looks decidedly split by franchise, with even respective protagonists going after each other, like Duke being slow-roasted by Ryu's Hadoken. Not too much or he'll dry out, get all tough and gamey. And Blanca looks outright bored as Destro clocks him, despite all the blood spatter. Maybe he's yawning, or perhaps it's a massive belch, and that's actually some food particulates the arms dealer is trying to block with his arm. Anyway, Ryu is giving Jinx some last-minute training, which feels like it risks making her fatigued all the sooner in her upcoming match, though I suppose it could be more beneficial, make her more agile and limber and so forth. He advises that she be quick, strong, and above all, calm. She can't control it for very long, and must only use it as a last resort. When performed by a seasoned ninja, a wet willy can be exceedingly dangerous. Storm Shadow, confirming he's secretly been working with the two, reminds her that he damaged the Psycho Drive, making Bison more vulnerable. By his standards, anyway. So hopefully she won't need it. You hit it with a couple of shuriken. Guile took a chunk out of it with his energy attack. Kind of petty of you to leave that out of this conversation. As Bison steps into the ring, the final match begins, the two trading hits, blocks, and mocking taunts. The Tyrant shows he's still got plenty of power, and the drive seems to still function despite the damage it received. He tells the little girl to submit, and maybe become one of his Shadaloo flunkies, but he is of course turned down, which he thinks is only delaying the inevitable. He seems able to back up that claim, grabbing her by the throat and about to deal a charged attack, only for his machine to fail him. This opens him up to Jinx's headbutt, which she follows up with throttling him.
Poor Bison, getting beat by a little girl.
Not if I get on social media and say you were a diversity hire.
He counters with what looks like clawing at her face. There's no blood, and that definitely does not look like a slap, so rather catty for the big bad despot, huh, folks? In any case, this seems to trigger something in Jinx, the it that's been hinted at a few times in this story. Her face changes, her hair turns red, and she's engulfed in a fiery aura. Are there 5 pure-hearted Saiyans in the audience, standing in a circle and holding hands? No, it's the Satsui no Hado, which, as previously mentioned, roughly translates to Surge of Murderous Intent, which, kind of self-explanatory. The antithesis of the technique Ryu has classically practiced, it imbues Jinx with unbelievable power, enough to both change her descriptive caption to Evil Jinx, and panic the otherwise menacing Bison.
Sometimes fear is the appropriate response.
He throws the nearby Jeep at her, but she just shoots right through it, leaving an explosion in her wake, while she derides her foe and his psycho power as nothing. A rather unexpected turn of events, Destro begins suggesting Baroness be prepared to do something, but he stops when he finds she's not in her seat. Which is why you never go for the large soda. That way you're not stuck in the bathroom during the best part of the show. Evil Jinx fires a point-blank Hadoken right in Bison's face, leaving him on the ground pleading and surrendering.
You would ask me for mercy?
I thought you were made of sterner stuff.
He'll get no peace or rest from her, shy of the embrace of death, as she punches him into the air, charges an energy sphere that she plants in his face, then plants his head into the ring, winning the match and the tournament. If she waters him every day, gives him plenty of sunlight, talks to him, she'll grow a whole new Bison. She rips his Psycho Drive in two and is about to show the now helpless dictator what real power is, but Ryu, Storm Shadow, and Snake Eyes stop her, saying that while they would have given into the power and let it control them, she's better than what she's about to do, strong enough to resist such temptation, which is why she was chosen. excluding that one anime movie where Ryu tapped into the Dark Hado, as it's also called, but regained control of himself afterwards.
Well, whenever you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
Their encouragement helps her fight the transformation, and Jinx returns to normal, passing out in Shadow's arms. Guile takes this opportunity to handcuff Bison as Cammy demands an explanation. The pilot explains the need-to-know intel she was left out of, that they manipulated the tournament, essentially arranging for Jinx and the Satsui no Hado to make it to the finals and defeat the Warlord. They had hoped Cammy would be able to do the job before the Psycho Drive was charged, but obviously that didn't pan out. And in order to help Jinx advance, Snake Eyes, difficult as it was, had to throw his fight with Rufus, who it's implied was helped along to make it as far as he did. Being used like this makes the Zoftig contestant furious, though his girlfriend is still trying to piece it all together. Wait, Rufus, honestly, do you really think that you beat him? As much as nostalgia makes me side with Snake Eyes, Wolverine beat Lobo, and Storm beat Wonder Woman, so Fat Guy defeating Little Ninja really isn't that outlandish to me. Insulted, Rufus insists he could beat anyone and everyone because he is smart and talented and strong and handsome, even if he wasn't in the Army, or Air Force, and demands a fight for third place. I feel like it would have made more sense for him to be challenging Snake Eyes, but maybe he's focusing on Brushhead because of his hierarchy in the whole scheme. Beneath the arena, Baroness is leading Crimson Viper and Crocmaster down a corridor to a backup Psycho Drive, which Destro told her where to find because he's a sentimental dope. Oh, why can't those two crazy kids make this relationship work? Is it the evil? I bet it's the evil. Powered concurrently with the one Bison used, it should be ready to go, so she insists Viper carry it as opposed to Croc. But it's Viper who turns out to be less trustworthy, attacking and incapacitating the wrestler and his pet. She's revealed herself as a triple agent, going from the CIA to the organization SIN to Cobra and back to her cherry gig at the CIA. Man, her resume has got to be a mess. As the two women fight, Viper accidentally damages the backup drive, and it begins glowing.
Weak, ineffectual, and clumsy? Of course you're a Fed,
says the only combatant who legitimately lost to Rufus. Not to mention, I'm pretty sure Cobra only hired her because her name has Viper in it, and y'all didn't bother doing any background checks. CV still plans on bringing Baroness in, but is shot in the shoulder by Zartan, under orders from Destro to retrieve the bespectacled villainess, and she takes off, certain she can get her chrome-faced boyfriend to build her a new drive. Yeah, but in exchange, he's going to make you be his date to his cousin's destination wedding next month. You won't know anyone there, it'll be a cash bar, and all the hors d'oeuvres will contain kale. You gotta ask yourself if all that potential power is really worth it. Above ground, Guile has obliged Rufus's demands for a third-place decider match, as he berates that the pilot's arrogance will be his undoing, just as Guile's contacts asks him if he'll need Plan B, since the big guy seems awful serious.
Why so serious?
He highly doubts it, and as the match begins with Rufus taking instant offense, Guile defeats him with a single mighty kick.
Such a mighty wallop.
This causes Chun-Li to do that excited jump she did in the older games. Probably just for the reference, but hey, she could also just be really glad that an obnoxious guy got KO'd like that. Beaten and embarrassed, thinking everyone is laughing at him, even though it doesn't look like they are, a purple mist, run off from the Psycho Drive, surrounds Rufus. He tries to take solace that he at least still has his lady, only to see Candy cozying up to Roadblock again. The combination of this indignity and psycho energy causes him to change, growing much larger in both body and mustache. Guile reconsiders Plan B.
What's Plan B? That's the one where we do something that isn't stupid.
And his contacts give the go-ahead, revealed to be General Hawk and Scarlet back in Joe HQ. Though this caption only gives her name one T. Typo, or alternate universe version of the character that spells it differently. You decide. A passing jet drops a shoulder-mounted artillery unit, and Guile lets loose with bullets and missiles firing from every barrel, like this was their version of the Rhino from Ratchet and Clank. Seriously, all it's missing is the 1812 Overture playing in the background. However, since we still have another issue to go, this doesn't stop the empowered Rufus, who generates 2 energy orbs, and as Candy pleads with him to stop, the issue closes on an aerial view of the island, where plumes of purple smoke have already erupted. And of course, we have the bracket at the end to remind us that Jinx is the tournament winner. Considering we've just been treated to giant Psycho Rufus's nipple rings, I don't think anyone is the winner here.
That's one of 100 memories that I don't want.
Issue 6's cover sees a blindfolded Jinx zeroing in on Sea Viper, with Bison and Destro among the action speed lines behind them, when the exchange of Gilmore Girls fan theories gets out of hand. After a very brief recap, we find Psycho Rufus has gotten even bigger, like he called in a favor from Rita Repulsa, and swears revenge on everyone for his humiliation. Destro tries lugging Bison away, I guess those handcuffs fell off or broke or something, but he's interrupted by a sonic boom to the back.
So I'm a big fat wet. Ah! Have some cheese, rat!
Guile demands answers for what he's done, but the Laird says this was the result of the heroes damaging the Psycho Drive and letting the stored energy into the air, which doesn't entirely feel accurate since Viper broke the backup machine, but I guess it's a safe bet Baroness told Destro what had happened, and he made a reasonable assumption that the CIA agent might be working with Guile and the Joes too. Brushhead calls for some ideas to deal with this new problem, but Command will have to get back to him with a plan, since they're now encompassed in an impenetrable bubble of psycho power.
We'll get a therapist on site to help the bubble talk through its problems. Hopefully it won't take too long, but the doctor will probably still charge for the full hour.
Feeling cheated and ganged up on, Rufus decides to repay such a sentiment in kind, horking up a waterfall of purple stuff. Thank goodness it's not Sunny Delight or that island would be wiped off the map. And rising from his mess are duplicates of the Street Fighters, Cobra agents, and Joes, specifically those not previously spotlighted in the story. However, since Ryu and Destro react like their allies are attacking them, you could be forgiven for thinking that the Psycho Vomit turned the likes of Blanca, Shipwreck, and others that we've only seen in the stand so far all evil. But Scarlet confirms to Guile that's not the case, that these aren't who they appear to be, which he relays to others, though it doesn't quite explain what the genuine articles are doing during all this. Maybe they're setting aside their instincts to try fighting Psycho Rufus because they know they would likely take some punches, kicks, laser blasts, or chi attacks meant for their doppelgangers, and are choosing to play it smart. The copies are beaten easily enough, which agitates Rufus further, paranoid that everyone thinks they're better than him. Candy again tries talking him down, that no one thinks that, nor are they better, but having seen her with his perceived enemies, he's not convinced. After another, fortunately off-panel regurgitation, he creates even more duplicates, some recreations like Vega, and some new ones like Tomax, Zaymot, Wild Bill, and a version of Lady J with a weird Joker face. I don't know how Rufus knows all these Joes, but you know how we feel about making Lady J look unattractive on this show.
1,000,000 years dungeon!
We get a really cool 2-page spread of this big fracas between our heroes and the Psycho clones, some you wouldn't mind seeing more focus on if it was possible, which makes this issue's cover feel much more subdued. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, it's just that with a focus on only a couple of characters, not only can it seem a bit misleading, this scene feels like one of the previous covers would have been more appropriate for number 6, specifically one that actually showed a free-for-all similar to it, or at the very least, the one where the heroes seem to be teaming up against an unseen enemy. As Rufus delights in all this, Guile contacts Joe Command for instructions on how to neutralize him. Scarlet says they need to stow the one-on-one fights and work together, while she feeds the necessary tactics in real time. Calling everyone's attention, Guile instructs Roadblock and Hakan to knock their target on his supersized behind. Then Cammy uses the force of her kicks to give some extra oomph to Storm Shadow's arrows to penetrate his belly. Rufus has been acting like a giant gas bag this whole time, so maybe they think this'll help deflate him. This is followed up with Chun-Li and Gung-Ho using hand-to-hand techniques. Maybe because both their names are hyphenated, or...
You know, Gung-Ho is a word of Chinese origin.
Sister, do I look like a guy that would know that?
No, you look like a guy that really likes showing off his torso tattoo, and has probably more than once knocked out the teeth of someone who asked if you were one of the village people. With the goofiest smile on his face, Guile then calls on Snake Eyes and Crimson Viper to deliver simultaneous kicks to the enemy's face, followed by the coup de grace, Jinx and Ryu combining their Hadouken blasts. Rufus is ever in denial, saying they can't do this to the greatest martial artists of all time, even as the energy overtakes him, and the impact can be seen from way up in the sky.
Next time on Fighter Joe Z.
After a moment, Guile confirms to Joe Command that despite the intensity of the attack, there are no casualties. Cammy's not thrilled that Bison seems to have gotten away, along with Cobra, but Stormy and Brushhead tell her the primary goal was to ruin their plans by destroying the psychodrives, so they did win in the end. Since you can't keep a narcissistic egomaniac down, a return to normal Rufus says their dishonorable tactics required an entire army just to take him down, since that's who he thinks this is all about. But Candy, apparently back in his good graces, says that if they needed all these warriors to beat him in a ginormous team-up, then it's more evidence that he truly is the greatest martial artist, living or dead. Jinx attempts a reality check, not above breaking his arm for real after everything he put them through, but preferring the delusional narrative, Rufus decides to be a gracious winner and considers her a sore loser, while being more concerned where Destro and Bison made off with his trophy. A trophy for a tournament he didn't even win. You don't get much more divorced from reality when you're both this deluded and a fictional character. In the air, Cobra agents are explaining their failure to a very displeased Cobra commander over their comm system. Between Storm Shadow's defection and some things for which Zartan and Destro will answer, this operation seems to be a wash, until the worried-looking Laird calls attention to a consolation prize, one potentially greater than the psychodrives, once they learn to harness the power of M. Bison himself, encased in what appears to be a stasis chamber. The commander seems okay with this, and orders the tyrant given over to Dr. Mindbender upon their return to Cobra's base.
We will schedule his appointment, tell him to arrive an hour early, then make him wait in the lobby an extra 25 minutes after it's supposed to start, with only a 30-year-old issue of People magazine to read. Beware Cobra's bites! Mwahaha!
Sometime later, outside a dojo in Japan, Ken, Ryu, Snake, Shadow, and Jinx are all training as a narrator commends their recent victory, both the people he knows and the others he's eager to meet. He can sense that Jinx has embraced the Satsui no Hado, his own power, and Akuma sneaks away into the wilderness, all too delighted at the prospect of a fitting challenge. Some people let winning a few games of Connect 4 go right to their heads. That was Street Fighter G.I. Joe, and I thought it was really good. I was expecting a very different crossover, maybe something akin to the Real American Heroes meeting Danger Girl, that they'd meet the Street Fighters for the first time, maybe be bewildered and astonished at their energy attacks and other elements from the series more atypical for them, and of course, they would team up to fight Bison. While kicking things off well into the tournament can potentially make one feel a little lost at first, it's definitely more unique as crossovers go, and it does a good job of informing us of the overall plot as it goes along, keeping enough in the dark that revelations don't feel too outlandish. We don't find out that Guile's been chatting with Joe HQ until issue 5, but it makes sense that would be his contact. And I gotta say, Plan B was kind of a fun payoff after so many mentions, but considering shoulder-mounted missiles first get brought up in response to gung-ho by his superiors in Joe Command, it kinda has an unpleasant context to it, unless Scarlet or Hawk meant it as a joke. I guess they didn't think to send it in and have Guile pretend to accidentally target Bison, because, the guy would probably just shield himself at the last second, and it might have inhibited our heroes learning more about the psychodrives. Speaking of, if fighting charges those things, why didn't Destro and the Commander just have their own tournament at Cobra Base? Make a bunch of their generals and minions knock the snot out of each other without involving Bison. My guess is it has something to do with the nature of psycho power, something that Bison has mastered that they don't know much about. They also leave it ambiguous why Storm Shadow heel face turned, and apparently not for the first time, according to Baroness's dialogue at the end.
Yeah, he's untrustworthy and could instantly turn on us for any reason, but he makes the best freaking cinnamon pecan macaroons Cobra Commander has ever tasted, and that's worth the risk, consarn it.
On a similar note of things not quite explained, why Jinx was the best option to use the Satsui no Hado without being fully corrupted by it. Was there something about her personality that made her distinct from Ryu, Snake, or Shadow? Was she maybe not as familiar with Bison, didn't know how terrible he was, didn't have that personal connection that Guile or Cammy might have? Heck, I'd have taken the idea that she's just less willing to kill than the others. That could have been a good angle for that teased sequel with Akuma that I guess never got off the ground. In many ways, the pacing felt a lot like that of a fighting game's story mode, though admittedly my experience is largely with those based on Dragon Ball Z. Most of the action takes place in the ring, with appropriate pauses for sudden twists, when cutscenes might take over, like with the damaged Psycho Drive or Snake Eyes throwing his fight with Rufus. And it likely helps that the writer has experience writing for the WWE, which is all about spectacle combat with a narrative element. I say likely because I don't watch wrestling. I mean, a genre that involves muscled guys and scantily clad women getting into fights for entertainment with elaborate storylines that can last for months or years? Why would that interest a comic book reader? While I'm not much invested in Street Fighter, and which versions of the Joes get represented in these crossovers can be kind of a toss-up, I rather enjoyed everyone. Almost. The humor was great, the interactions felt natural, I especially liked Roadblock being so enthusiastic about Hakan's oil, but obviously Rufus was by far the most grating. Yeah, he got beat rightfully and resoundingly, even before his transformation, and I get that's more than likely his whole deal. Self-taught, has some good moves, but squanders whatever potential he has because of his ego, outright lying during his tantrums to make things go his way, and just repeats himself over and over, even in the same dialogue bubble. But for some reason, it's like there's already a real-world source of rampant, unchecked narcissism and pathological lying, leading to serious real-world damage and harm that makes what this character represents feel less like satire or parody and more a sad reality that's become uncomfortably acceptable. But who can say why I would think that? One could argue the 6th issue almost didn't need to happen, that the story could have been nicely wrapped up in 5 like a lot of IDW crossovers, but I like that it offered a nice, surprising last-minute threat that gave us more matchups, more cameos, and some teamwork, along with some Easter eggs that didn't feel too forced. You never want to force an Easter egg. That's how you get a big mess to clean up, an awkward visit to the doctor's office, and a restraining order from an anthropomorphic bunny. Or so I've heard. It did seem a little weird seeing some of the Joes bust rock and possibly concrete or cement with their heads and be none the worse for wear. With the Street Fighter characters, you can imagine there's ki or some other similar explanation involved, but that's pretty far removed from what I'm used to seeing with the likes of Roadblock or his teammates. I think one could argue Bison felt a little easily beaten. He was appropriately played up as the biggest bad, not just physically imposing, but using psychological tricks, even if some were as basic as condescendingly calling women little girls. But perhaps it simply speaks to the intensity of the Dark Hado, like he had one or more traumatic losses to someone that was wielding it, explaining why he might seem to have fallen to pieces and panicked rather quickly. For a guy that doesn't seem above offing his enemies when he can, I guess he never really got the handle on something that literally translates to murderous intent. But again, I'm not familiar with the franchise or its greater lore, so this is very much an outsider perspective as far as some character details might go. I really liked the art, very vibrant colors for costumes and powers, and about the worst I can say about it is how Roadblock looked psychotically thrilled to murder a stranger in the ring, and there were moments where Rufus's mustache sometimes looked like it was painted onto his face, but neither of those are really deal breakers. And isn't it weird how his nipple rings disappeared when he went back to normal? Were they just a manifestation of psycho power? There's a doctoral thesis for you. The psychological implications of manifestation of body piercings as they pertain to metamorphic energy possession. We really ask the important questions here on Ticking Issue, folks. Lastly, and maybe not as interesting, I noticed something about the pairs Scarlet and Guile called to rein in Rufus. First were the fighters that also had culinary acumen, then two that had been known to dance between working with the heroes and villains, if for different reasons. Also, Cammy White, like Shadow's traditional attire. Chinese kicksmith Chun-Li, matched with a bruiser whose call sign is from her native tongue. Then the two whose names were serpent-related. And finally, the sensei and pupil that utilized a dangerous technique to prepare for the tournament, then finished off their target with an attack synonymous with one of the franchises. Felt like these were intentional choices, even if the reasons were trivial or silly, but then again, I could just be reading too much into it. This miniseries was a lot of fun. Very action-packed and violent, but shies away from more visceral representations despite that. Even if you're not familiar with the World Warriors, and the story might have a couple of holes or hiccups, you can still have a great time with this. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.